Hello, you may or you may not know that I've just been on Celebrity Mastermind. I know, Celebrity Mastermind. I don't consider myself to be one. I don't really know how that happened, but it did anyway. Anyway, my chosen charity was Maytree. And of course, on the show, you don't get a chance to talk about your chosen charity. And I've realised that for a lot of people, they might have thought, what's Maytree? So we've made a short podcast where I spoke to Sadia, who works at Maytree. And Maytree, for those who don't know, it's a residential respite centre for people who are feeling suicidal. So in the next 26 minutes, you'll find out a little bit more about Maytree and their work, and also a general discussion as well about mental health and suicidal feelings.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much. We always welcome support, and yeah, I mean, we're unique in terms of what we offer, and sadly, people will need services like ours more than ever at the moment. So, thank you. So I'm curious, like, how are you finding the pandemic? How's it affected you, and how are you finding lockdown 3?
It's interesting, isn't it? I don't know how you found it, because I think one of the intriguing things about lockdown is, for instance, people with anxiety have found that it's almost easier. Some of them, not all of them obviously, but I've spoken to a few people who said that because the framework is so specific, whereas in normal existence where we get, there are so many different places where you might get that paranoia, anxiety, etc. Now you go, well, this is the box we're in, and there's this virus. And so I found it very interesting talking to other people and to therapists about how they've been dealing with people, and on the other side, of course, for a lot of other people, it's been a total horrible realization of the potentials of mental health, hasn't it, and where it can go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think for people with anxiety, it's the strange thing of that it's weirdly validating. It's like you spend your life waiting for some big catastrophe to happen. Well, now it's actually happening. So your anxiety is somewhat rooted. It's not just paranoia, it's like rooted in reality. And it's a bit of a collective experience. That's not to say that it's pleasant though. So do you have any advice or tips or things that have helped you to cope with your mental health, or things that anyone who might be watching this might find helpful to hear?
See, my thing is that I always descend into busyness. So I have to work all the time. And that was the thing that I realised when the lockdown began. Immediately with my friend Trent and my friend Josie Long, we went, right, every morning we're going to do a live show. And we'll find loads of guests, and we would get Mark Gatiss and Joe Brand and all these people like, oh, are you free? And everyone was free. So I think that is my coping mechanism for most of life, is to perpetually work, which of course isn't necessarily healthy, and I'm not very good at downtime, and I've never really been very good at downtime, but it has meant that I think every now and again it's very strange being someone who spends their life travelling to live in my attic. It's an odd experience, but I think for all and I think I'm also in a very fortunate position in terms of the fact that due to the amount of work I had in the previous few years, I don't at the moment have financial fears, whereas of course a lot of people have very tangible. I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? And I'm interested to know what you think on this, which is there's tangible anxiety, tangible despair, and then there is, I don't know if ethereal despair or what the right way of saying it is, that there, because so I think sometimes you can go, well, it's very specific. And in some ways, I think in mental health, you can see why that can be seen by people as, being a better position to go, well, I know exactly what I'm worried about. And then there's that other one, which is it just all of these different ghosts that can appear. And you can't define it. And that's also, I suppose, I wonder, with Maytree, do you find yourself, one of the problems I think for some people with mental health, when it can really build to a point which is of utter desperation, is the shame of even believing that you might be different. That bit of just going, oh, well, there's so people dealing with really awful things in the world, and I don't have the right to feel despairing. I mean, do you see that quite a lot?
We do, absolutely, we do. It doesn't help that we live in a culture that finds it really hard to talk about any feelings at all. And of course, all feelings are valid, from the minor to the major. But feelings are not. It is relative, but it's not an Olympics. It's not a competition. And what you feel is what you feel. That's your reality. And And I do think, just to pick up on what you said, at the moment we are living in a time with there's actual anxiety that you can pin your worries on, and then there's the generalized existential anxiety and despair that some people live with all the time. So we kind of have this strange perfect storm, and it's very, very hard to talk about suicide. It's hard to even say the word for some people, for a lot of people actually. Um, People find it easy to talk around it, talk under it, talk above it, talk side of it, but no one really wants to go there. So we do help people who maybe have never shared it before. The people at Maytree might be the first people they've ever talked to about it, because of course you want to talk to your loved ones, but they might become really afraid. They might overreact, they might underreact because they want it to go away, and they of course worry for the outcome of their loved ones. So it can help to have a bit of distance from it, but it helps to not shame the feeling. Um, it, Everyone's lived experience is valid, and what you're going through is real, and it doesn't matter if objectively speaking someone might have it worse. What does that mean to you? Um, so that's kind of where we try to help, is to
How
validate and
how,
reassure people.
how did you get involved? Where did your interest begin?
So I actually used to be a volunteer myself before I joined the team. I've always been interested in psychotherapy and people's mental health, and I really wanted to just get experience working with people directly. A friend of mine used to volunteer, so that's how I heard about Maytree. So then I started volunteering as well. And it's very enjoyable isn't the right word, but fulfilling. It's very rewarding. It's very rich. You really get to the heart of the matter. You really get down to brass tacks, if you will. There's no small talk. It's all big talk. And it's very rich having people share their experiences with you. It's quite an honor, actually, to have people open up to you and to trust you with some of the deepest, darkest things that maybe they've ever lived through. And and you can see, I don't want to say change, but you can see the subtle shift that happens when you allow space for the feelings. They start to work on themselves. It's like the stubborn, like feelings that are maybe very, very stubborn. They just soften just a little bit if you just allow them to be, without judging them or without shaming them. And I'm sure, we've all maybe had that experience with ourselves, when you're having a hard time and then you tell yourself, oh, that was so shit what I did. Why did I do that? That was really stupid. Do you feel better or do you feel worse? You probably feel worse. But if you kind of sit with it and go, okay, I can sort of see why that happened and I don't feel great about it, but okay, then you might be able to move past it. But the more you judge yourself and the more judgment you might maybe get reinforced by other people, the feelings just kind of double down.
I found it. I saw a friend of mine, Josh, who's a therapist, and he said one of the big breakthroughs in therapy
Mm-hmm.
is the realization that you don't have to be as good as you think you have to be. That actually, do you know what? Sometimes you aren't a great human being.
Yeah.
And that's not, and I think, and I find it from a neuroscientific point of view as well, I find it very interesting, which is as we've had these discoveries about the fact that there are so many different things unconsciously going on in your mind that lead to any action you take, that a lot of it is not you,
Mm.
that I actually think that gives us real, genuine evidence at that point when you make a mistake. Yeah, you were there. But you know what? It wasn't
You were
all your fault. There was a lot of other stuff going on.
exactly. We could definitely say you were there, but beyond that, there's not too much more. I mean, what is it they say? You're not the feelings. You're the one that watches the feelings.
Mm.
You're the one that's observing feelings. That's who you actually are. And yeah, I mean, you don't get past anything by judging it. That's the thing. You can't move past it. You just get stuck in it. And I think that's a common theme that, not just of suicidality, but depression. And if we think about suicidality as maybe the final symptom of depression, like that's kind of like when, you could describe suicide as depression ultimately killing you. And, you see that a lot in depression is a feeling of stuckness, a real feeling of stuckness that you can't move beyond where you are. You can't envisage anything beyond where you are. Um, and there is a way past that. Even when people are at that point, I think if they're seeking help, there is some part of them that knows that there's something beyond. Um, but you just don't know how to get there on your own.
I find that so in the in a book that I wrote a while ago, part of the chapter was about suicide, and I ended up, because I initially it started off with a piece of stand up. I was out in Australia, and I got to know one of the people who kind of basically looked after me while I was out in Adelaide. And one day she said to me, she said, "You should do comedy about suicide." And the reason was that her daughter had taken her life. And she felt that because it was always within, suicide was a place. Once you went to hospital, once you went to an institution, or there were places it was spoken about. But the idea that it might be talked about just in the flippant world of comedy, or by a musician or whatever it was, and I found that very interesting, because then when of course it's the one bit of stand up more than any other where, because I like to improvise and muck around, but the moment I got to that bit, my brain was at its most concentrated. I don't think I've ever felt, because even though it didn't mean that I had to do it as a scripted piece, I knew that if I got distracted by the wrong thing, all the intention in it was gone. And of course, that was very interesting to then talk to so many people, because after a gig, and sometimes I would normally try and work a way of setting it up that would mean that people had been given some warning. And then I would have, like, someone I'd known who I didn't know had it turned out he'd attempted suicide on more than one occasion, and he told me this thing. He said it was such an odd thing. He said on one of the times of despair. And he decided it was a Friday, and he said, I decided I was going to kill myself. And then suddenly I went, "Don't kill yourself on the Friday. You'll miss the weekend. Do it on Sunday." Now that to me is a and that shows you, when you were just talking about that strange detached feeling, that he could still logically look at that. I hate my life, but the weekend will be okay, and then I'll do it. That is, I think, those kind of feelings that to me are, we just don't hear about that
Right.
state of mind enough.
Absolutely. And I think we live in a culture that finds it hard to talk about suicide in any form, let alone in comedy. That feels like very much a taboo subject. And, that's a wonderful example of how, first of all, that sometimes the banality of the thoughts sometimes, and also that, can you just hold on? Is there one tiny thing? Is there one tiny, tiny thing to live for? Even if it's as small as just the weekend, that could be enough to kind of put it off.
Yeah,
that's really interesting, and it's quite powerful actually.
There was another friend of mine who, when she was going to jump off a building, and then she realised that she only had her socks on, and she started to think, well, hang on a minute, should I pop my shoes on, or should I take my socks off? Because you don't want to be found just with your socks on. And she spent so long in this frame of mind that, of course, she had that realisation. She went, do you know what? If I'm worried about how I'm found, I don't think, and she found, I don't know if this is the right way of saying it, you can tell me, but she found that sense of self within that thought process.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's only by examining it and going closer into the thoughts and digging a bit deeper under the surface that maybe she was like, oh, actually, I'm not sure I'm ready to do this. I don't know if I really want to do this. But if you kind of ignore all the thoughts, you might just be more likely to just go ahead and do something hasty. But there is a dark humor in it. And maybe you have to find that sometimes. But there's an absurdity. There's an absurdity to thoughts like that. On the one hand, to have those two conflicting thoughts, I don't think I want to live anymore. But also, what about my shoes and socks?
Yeah, it's such a. How do you at Maytree then? Because is it right? It's 3 nights and 4 days. It's residential. Is it? Well, I know
4
obviously
nights, 5 days. Yeah.
4 nights, 5 days.
4 nights, 5 days. Yeah.
So what can you tell me? First of all, how is it that someone will find themselves at Maytree? What is there a normal kind of course of events that might lead to Maytree?
Yeah, there can be. Not always. It's always slightly different. But for people who refer themselves, who contact us directly themselves, so if when people are maybe Googling like methods or ways that they might end their lives, we'll come up as one of the search results. So people do often find us like that. Um, and so once we have contact with somebody, we'll spend a couple of weeks over the phone getting to know them, just finding out a bit about their circumstances and just exploring like what are the circumstances that's led to this point? Because it's never just one thing. It's always a series of things, sometimes compounding stresses and traumas and things happening at the worst possible time. And so we spend a bit of time building up some trust. They might start exploring their feelings and how things have been for them at that time of their lives. And then we'll discuss, is this the right thing? Did they think that coming to have a stay at our centre is the right thing for them? Also, people do get referred by, sometimes other healthcare professionals of any kind. So we take different types of referrals, or sometimes even family and friends. Um, but from that point of referral, whether it's themselves or someone else, we spend a bit of time getting to know them. But everyone's circumstances are different. We do have guests from all walks of life, and I think if you're trying to look at patterns or themes in terms of how people are feeling when they arrive at that point where they're seeking help and they're talking to someone on the phone and they're deciding this is where they are and do they need some help? Do they need some services like us to help them? It's a sense of hopelessness. It's a sense of disempowerment. It's a sense of that things won't ever change. And again, it's that stuckness. It's that stuckness. It's the inability to foresee a future that actually seems livable, but also plausible. A good future does not seem plausible. It seems out of their reach. From the point that they're at, that seems out of reach. But I think anyone, no matter how much despair they're in, if they're seeking help, there's a tiny part of them, even if it's 99% despair and 1% something else, that something else is telling them that there's a way to live. They just don't know yet what that way looks like, and they don't know how to get there.
So what might happen then over that 5 days?
Mm-hmm.
How might a stay unfold?
So we have a team of volunteers and staff who are really well trained, and every day we encourage the guests to spend some time with the volunteers that are on shift or the staff that are around, and they might have one or two sort of sessions, if you will, with that person. And we call it befriending because it's not therapy, even though a lot of our volunteers are maybe training in careers that's similar to therapy, but not all, certainly not all. And they just spend time. They spend time listening. They spend time exploring, asking questions, getting curious about what that person's been going through, what it's been like. I mean, I think for most people, I don't think most people have experienced 5 consecutive days of exploring your life and how you're feeling and like traumas, difficult events, challenging events. Because over those 5 days, it's like you go deeper and deeper and deeper. The fact that they're consecutive and it's kind of all contained in one stay. I mean, I've never had that. I don't know many people that have had that outside of that kind of setting. And it's very, I guess, it can be quite healing, I suppose. It's having someone listen with empathy and with reassurance, and someone who's sufficiently distant from you as well, that they're not going to be scared by the suicidal feelings. They're not scared. They can hold it. They've heard it before. They've heard thoughts of that nature before. They're not afraid of it. Because I think even for some people, they're worried about going to their GP, maybe even their psychotherapist. They're scared to really say that they're feeling this way, because they're seen as a liability, or that they're going to do something rash, that they're not in their right mind. And I think just being able to just let that guard down and just being able to just be completely honest without worrying about burdening that person, without thinking that you're going to shock that person. They can hold it. They've been trained. They know what to expect. They've heard it. They're not scared of it. And that takes a lot of the pressure off. Takes a lot of the pressure off, that they don't have to be alive for anyone else. They don't have to do anything for anyone else. They don't have to worry about making that person feel better about their difficult thoughts. It's incredibly unburdening, I think. So over those 5 days, you might not, you might struggle to start talking very deeply straight away. We find that over the course of a few days, the person starts to get more comfortable. They start to become more relaxed. They start to find insights. And I think having the different volunteers and staff talk back to them, offer different insights and reflections back to them, they start to pick up on things or maybe notice patterns or things that have happened in their past that maybe they hadn't had someone give them insights on before. Um, and and I think it's also about, leaving your other life responsibilities behind. Everything's taken care of at the service, the house is cleaned, meals are all provided for. So you're not having to run around and do other things. Like, we really encourage people to use that time just for them, and to use that time. And also, it's not to say that's just focused on talking. People go for walks, people spend time in the garden, there's arts and crafts, you can do cooking, things that just help you get into some state of safety and relaxation, or just like that, just like calm your system down a little bit. Because people, arrive with us, sometimes very keyed up, you know, very, very stressed, in a state of chronic stress that they've maybe been holding for years in some cases.
Well, it must be. I mean, it must be frightening to actually have that moment of going, "I'm here
Mm.
now."
Mm.
I think of the short period of time where I went and saw a therapist, and the nausea before you go
Hmm.
right, better go ring the doorbell now,
Hmm.
and all that,
Hmm.
just for something
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah, it takes a lot of vulnerability, a lot of vulnerability. Absolutely. It takes a lot of courage to seek help and to turn up and to actually step into that process. It takes a lot of courage. Yes.
what do you think are the changes we need to see? And I mean this in the broadest way, in
Hmm.
terms of, I mean, from talking to a lot of people about, it seems like such an important part of your work is that someone says, I was listened to, I was heard.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
also could say
Hmm.
the words that I wouldn't, I didn't even
Yeah.
want other people to listen to. And talking to various people about this, it does seem, one of the problems. I mean, in fact, again, going back to the book, I did an interview with someone who said, because I wrote a little bit about suicidal thoughts, my own, and someone said, what would your son think? Do you worry what your son will think? And I think, well, I wrote hopefully an honest book with honest things, and hopefully what I would think is that he would go, oh, our dad sometimes had those thoughts too.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that, and that's what, and I thought it was interesting, as you said before, that taboo level.
Yeah.
And it's in a very, I mean, that's something that fascinates me, is that there are, from what I can gather, there's about 3 different levels, and that many people will have suicidal thoughts. They will never take
Mm.
suicidal actions, but they will
Yes.
have suicidal thoughts. And the
Yeah.
moment that you start to open that up,
Mm.
and as you said, and it kind of reveals what can an absurdity, which is an absurdity
Mm.
that really can be talked about, and in
Mm.
which you can, and so yeah. Sorry, I've asked you 17 questions in one, and then actually gone on a monologue instead. So I apologise for that. But what do you think are the things that we need to change, maybe about ourselves and about our society, in terms of attitudes to mental health?
Well, I think actually that they're linked. So I think we need to change ourselves in order to change our society. And I think that means showing ourselves some actual compassion, not just use the words, not just say that we accept things, that we're okay with things. It's actually showing ourselves compassion, because I think we live in a society that's a little bit allergic to real feelings, to talking about real feelings, expressing real feelings. And actually, it's just a reflection of how we are dealing with our own feelings. I think we reject other people's feelings when we can't deal with our own. And so I think we need to practice, we need to start by practicing showing ourselves some actual compassion, because then we expand our capacity to deal with difficult feelings in other people. And when we can do that, we help each other. That's how we actually help each other. It's not going to make difficult feelings go away. It's not going to make really difficult feelings like suicidal feelings go away or stop. But they're not abnormal. They're not outside of the range of feelings. All feelings are valid, right? And I think if we could start to build some tolerance for those scary things, it starts to become more manageable. And then you kind of start this virtuous cycle, then people being able to talk about it more. And then if people talk about it more, they get support. And if they get support, they're less likely to actually take action on it. So I think we've got to get less scared of the feelings. We've got to show actual compassion in the really difficult moments, not just, talking about it on social media or writing about it, or, um, it has to be an embodied thing. It has to be an embodied thing. And we have to show that we have to work through our judgment and our fear and our shame, about these types of feelings. There's nothing shameful about any feelings. That's actually the truth of it. That's when you actually work with people in crisis, the thing that actually gets them through it is working through shame and realizing that the shame doesn't belong there.
Can I ask you? You can pass on this
Mm,
if you want to,
mm,
but how has working at Maytree changed you? Do you think?
mm. It's just very humbling. It's very humbling. It makes me grateful for just a normal day. You realize that some people are living with some people are in a state of perpetual despair and things that feel unbearable. And when I'm having just like a meh kind of day, it gives me some perspective. Not every day is going to be like a wow, wonderful day, and that's fine. That's fine. Just feeling all right is more than good enough, especially in the pandemic. I have to say that's been one of my mottos in the pandemic is I don't strive to be more than fine, and that's more than good enough right now. And yeah, it's really humbling, and it also gives me a continuous reminder of we're really all in it together. People can't get through these types of crises on their own. Suicide is a public health issue, actually. So it makes me think about the bigger picture as well, and about the multiple levels of support that a person needs to really live their lives and be okay in their lives.
Brilliant. How do people find out more about Maytree then? Where should they go?
So you can go to maytree.org.uk. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Maytree Respite.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sadia. Thanks for listening or watching and listening. Well, hopefully if you were watching, you were listening. You weren't just watching. Anyway, look, the thing is, thank you. And I just wanted to mention that at Cosmic Shambles, we have got loads of other shows, some of which do deal with some of the topics we've just talked about. And in particular, I'd recommend Brain Yapping with Rachel England and Dean Burnett, which talks about psychology and different ideas about mental health. Bye-bye.